What's up, everyone? So today we're checking out something that feels like one of the coolest filmmaking tools we've tested in a while. This is the brand new iFootage X DJI Shark Slider Nano 2, specifically the 860 version. And right away, this thing feels like iFootage looked at traditional motorized sliders and asked one simple question: how do we make this way faster, smarter, and less annoying to use? The Nano 2 is built in collaboration with DJI, and that partnership completely changes the experience here, because instead of treating the slider and the gimbal like two separate systems, the Nano 2 basically turns your DJI Ronin into part of the slider ecosystem itself. And for us, that's the biggest selling point immediately.
Because today we're pairing this with our DJI Ronin RS5, and the fact that this slider still fully supports older DJI gimbals like the RS5 is a huge win.
So yeah, today we're going through the setup, the design, the app experience, the motorized movement, tracking features, real-world usability, some quirks we noticed, and whether this thing is actually worth adding to your filmmaking setup. So if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and let's get into it. Now, first up, the version we have here is the Nano 2 860, which is the longer version of the slider. And for product shots, cinematic E-roll, interviews, YouTube setups, and controlled motion shots, this length feels like the sweet spot. The build quality immediately feels premium too. The whole thing uses a combination of aluminum and carbon fiber, so even though it feels solid, it's actually surprisingly lightweight for what it's doing.
And honestly, once you mount the RS5 on top, the entire setup just looks incredibly clean.
Now, one thing we noticed immediately is that this isn't trying to be one of those giant cinema industry sliders that require an entire crew to move around. The Nano 2 feels designed specifically for modern creators, YouTubers, solo filmmakers, commercial creators, product reviewers, travel shooters, content creators, all of that. And that's probably why this thing makes so much sense, because the second we started setting it up, it became obvious this system is focused heavily on speed and simplicity. Now, powering the setup is super straightforward. The Nano 2 uses USB-C power, which already makes life easier compared to some older slider systems that require giant external battery solutions. iFootage has their own battery option for this thing, but we also tested it with larger USB-C battery packs, and it worked perfectly fine. And one really cool thing here is that the slider can also power the Ronin itself through the included communication cable. That cable is very important, by the way, because this is what allows the slider and the DJI gimbal to actually communicate with each other. Without it, you lose a huge part of the Nano 2's magic. Once connected though, suddenly the entire setup feels synchronized. The slider movement, the gimbal movement, the tracking, all of it starts working together almost like one unified system. And that changes everything. Because normally, setting up motion control shots can feel kind of intimidating, but with this setup, it becomes ridiculously fast. Now, the actual setup process is pretty simple.
We mounted the Nano 2 onto a sturdy tripod setup, attached the RS5, balanced the camera, plugged in the communication cable, connected power, opened the iFootage Moco app, and basically started shooting within minutes.
And yes, technically you can use two light stands or other support setups, but if you're running a heavier camera configuration with a gimbal attached, you definitely want a solid tripod underneath this thing, especially because the payload capacity here is honestly impressive. The Nano 2 supports up to around 15 pounds, which is kind of wild considering how compact the whole slider actually is. That means mirrorless setups, cinema cameras, heavier lenses, monitors, all of that becomes completely usable here. Now, once we got into the app experience, this is where the Nano 2 started getting really fun. The app itself is actually surprisingly clean and easy to use. You can set up multiple keyframes, customize movements, adjust timing, control looping, and create some genuinely cinematic camera moves without needing advanced motion control knowledge. But the fastest and coolest feature here is manual marking mode, because this basically lets you physically move the slider and the gimbal exactly where you want your start and end points to be.
So for example, we positioned our first shot with the RS5 controls, marked point A, then slid the camera over manually, adjusted framing again with the gimbal, marked point B, hit standby, and that was basically it.
Now the slider automatically recreates that exact motion path smoothly every single time. And it feels awesome, especially for product videos, because suddenly getting those smooth cinematic slider shots that normally take forever becomes ridiculously easy. Slow reveal shots, parallax movement, orbit-style motion, tracking products, cinematic desk setups, camera reveals, all of that suddenly becomes accessible very quickly. And because the Ronin itself is part of the movement, the camera isn't just sliding left and right, it's actively panning, tilting, reframing, and tracking throughout the shot. That's the part that makes this thing feel way more advanced than a basic motorized slider. Now, one thing we genuinely loved while testing the setup is how creative you can get with multiple points. The Nano 2 supports up to 8 keyframes in a single movement sequence, so instead of just doing basic A to B shots, you can create these complex cinematic camera paths that move, rotate, pause, reveal, and transition all in one continuous motion. And for B-roll creators, this thing is kinda addicting. We found ourselves constantly experimenting with new movement combinations because the setup process was fast enough that it didn't interrupt creativity. Now, autofocus performance also becomes really important here, because once the slider and gimbal are moving together, having reliable autofocus makes the entire system way more powerful. We tested this with subject tracking enabled, and modern mirrorless autofocus systems handle this really well now, especially if you're using Sony, Canon, or newer autofocus systems with touch tracking. You can literally tap your subject, start the slider motion, and the camera just stays locked onto the target while the entire setup moves dynamically around it. And the results honestly look incredibly professional. So at the end of the day, we think the biggest strength of the Nano 2 is that it makes motion control filmmaking feel approachable. It doesn't feel intimidating, it doesn't feel overly technical, and most importantly, it actually makes you want to use it, which matters more than people realize. Because we've tested plenty of filmmaking tools that technically do amazing things, but the setup process becomes such a hassle that you stop reaching for them after a while. The Nano 2 doesn't feel like that. This thing feels practical, fast, creative, and really well thought out for modern content creators, especially if you already own a DJI Ronin, because that compatibility is what makes this system feel so smart. Instead of forcing creators to buy an entirely separate, expensive ecosystem, iFootage basically built around gear a lot of creators already have, and that was probably the smartest decision they could have made. So yeah, overall, the iFootage x DJI Shark Slider Nano 2 860 feels like one of the best creator-focused motion sliders we've seen in a while.
The RS5 integration works beautifully. The movement looks cinematic, the setup stays relatively compact, the app is easy to understand, and the actual footage you get out of this thing instantly levels up production quality.
Now, obviously, this isn't necessarily for everybody. If you never shoot cinematic B-roll, product content, interviews, YouTube videos, or controlled motion shots, then yeah, you probably won't need something like this. But if you're serious about filmmaking, content creation, product videography, commercial work, or just adding more dynamic movement into your videos without dealing with massive cinema rigs, honestly, the Nano 2 makes a lot of sense. But alright guys, that's gonna be it for this one. Let us know down in the comments, would you actually add a motorized slider like this to your setup, or are you still rocking fully handheld shots for everything? Because once you start getting shots like this, it's kinda hard to go back. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel for more filmmaking and camera gear content like this, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace!